Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Engagement Designer demo series. In the last episode, we talked about the difference between tasks, nodes, and gateways. In this episode, we're going to talk about the input and output mapping. The input and output mapping is very important to know because it's what's defined as the information that passes through tasks as your workflow runs. We'll start here with the start node. The start node is a special node that will have only output mapping. And the start node directly ties to an event that we defined within the event catalog. If you have not yet seen the event catalog episode, I highly recommend going back to the Administration Console event catalog episode to see how we can create events that will live on the event bus that defines when a workflow will run. So here in the start node, if I were to double click, it will open off to the right our properties pane. In our properties pane, you'll see directly correlated with events, we have the event family, event type, and event version. Here we'll need to select what event family, type, and version tie directly to this workflow, so that this workflow knows when it should run based on a specific event. Back as my example before listed, I created an event called event family Nathan. So I'll go ahead and select that event family Nathan here. And that will refine my event type, listing the only one that I created under that event family, called event type Nathan. Then I will then select the version, and my only version for this type of event was 1.0. So what that's done now is that it has tied my start node to that specific event, so that whenever this event runs or is detected on the Avaya Breeze event bus, this workflow will run. When this event runs, it brings over some information from that event. If you remember, when I created this event, I created a variable under the event object container called text. So if I click on the output mapping here, I will see that variable called text. That variable is coming in directly from the event and will dynamically pass information in from the event body to my workflow here. I effectively have this start schema off to the right, which is an object that is automatically created, and if your event body object here isn't automatically mapped, it should automatically map to the start schema here and the start schema object. This will then save the information that comes in from the event body, so any information that comes in my text string here, and save it to this start schema object so that I have the information saved for later. Output mapping is very important for saving information anytime this event runs. It is also important for saving information anytime a task runs, but we'll get to that in a second. So my information is being passed and saved into this start schema object here. I can go ahead and click save to save the output mapping, and then I can click on the canvas to minimize my properties pane. Now what I want to do is use that information that's coming in from that event and use the information that's coming in through that text variable. So to start, I'm going to go to my notification folder in the palette on the left, and I'm going to drag in a send text message task. I'm going to drag and drop it, and I'm going to align it to my start node here using these red lines, so that when I highlight over my start node, I can see a blue dot. This blue dot I can click and drag over to my send text message task and then release, effectively connecting my start node to my send text message task. This means anytime this workflow starts, first thing it should do is send a text message. Now I need to define the information that is going through this send text message task. By double clicking on it, I see that it opens my properties pane off to the right again. And I see that I need to enter in 3 fields here as the sender's phone number, the recipient's phone number, and the SMS body. These fields can either be entered in through the input mapping, or I can effectively click into the text box here and just start typing. This is effectively hard coding information into this into this tasks field. And that way, anytime this task runs, it will use this variable that is typed into this text box here. For the sender's phone number in this lab, it doesn't matter what I enter, so I'll just simply enter in this number right here, and this will be my default sender's phone number for any time this task runs. The recipient's phone number is the person who is receiving the text message, and I'll use my hard-coded phone number as my personal phone number. The SMS body is something that I want to change dynamically. Because I want it to change dynamically, I cannot start typing in this text box. I will need to do some input mapping in order to pass information into this task. I can do that one of two ways. I can either click this button right here, which will show a drop-down of all the information that can be included as an input mapping to this field right here. Or as an option, I can click in the bottom here, the input mapping. The input mapping gives me an option showing all of the object containers that allow me to pass information into my send SMS task. All the object containers here give me information showing things like global variables, information coming in from a call, if it was a phone call triggering this, or information that I had saved in that start schema object that I show within that start node. Since I want to use the text from the start schema, I want to map this information, text string object, into my SMS body. So effectively, anytime this workflow runs, it's going to use the text that comes in from the event and text it to me on my personal cell phone. I map that information in the input mapping by highlighting over this blue arrow, clicking and dragging over to the object I want to map it to, which is my SMS body, and then releasing. This will effectively input map all information that comes in from that start schema object, that text string, into my SMS body. It's important to note that you need to match types within this. If I were to do something like map a string to an object, it's going to need to use some function after that, because mapping a string is not of type object, so we need to know how to map that string effectively using a function. You'll see that automatically put a little blue fx on top of my line here. This means that there is a function attached to this input mapping. If I double click on any of the lines here, it's going to open another window called my expression editor. In this expression editor, we are effectively seeing a function run on top of this input mapping. Without getting too much into detail, what you need to know here is that it's taking my start schema text string from the information of this object in order to make this valid. Checking expressions works like checking the information to make sure that strings match to strings or objects match to objects. For this example, we're not going to go into depth on how the expression editor works, but it's important to know that if you want to check an expression, just click validate to make sure your expression is valid, and then click save to save that expression. Input mappings that do not have functions attached to them will not show a blue FX on it. And for this sort of demo right here, I do not need this input mapping, so I'm going to delete it by clicking on it and just hitting delete. Now that my input mapping is the way I want it, I'm going to go ahead and click save. As you can see now, my text box here is no longer editable and is grayed out, showing that start schema.text is going to dynamically be mapped anytime this task runs. This means that any information that comes in from the event in the start schema is going to be sent as an SMS to my hard-coded mobile number. We can check the output mapping here, and much like the output mapping of the start schema, we are allowed to save information that comes from this task. We have the information here from send SMS to see the status, whether or not it's succeeded or failed. I don't need this information right now, so I'm not going to save it. So I can go ahead and click save, and it'll just warn me that I have not output mapped anything, so I will just say yes, that's okay. Now that I've mapped everything and typed in the text boxes all the information that I need for this task, I can click on the canvas to minimize my properties pane. Now what I need to do is then end this workflow. Since I have a start node, I need to have an end node in order to end the workflow effectively. In my palette on the left, I'll scroll down to events, and I'm going to click and drag in an end node. And I can align it to my send text message task like this using the red lines. And then by doing the same as I did with the start node, I can click and drag the blue dot to the end node, effectively then ending this branch of the workflow, saying that after you send the text message and finish the send text message task, end the workflow. Now I need to check to see if this workflow is valid. First, I'll save it by clicking the little drop down and clicking save workflow, and then I'll validate it. By clicking validate, it's going to check for any syntax errors or warnings that I may have tied to this workflow. As I can see, I have no errors and I have no warnings. That means my workflow is valid. Two ways I can test this workflow to see if it works are through debugging or deployment. Debugging, I can simply click on this little Start Debugging button, and it'll effectively ask me to enter in the information that comes in through that start node. So by entering in information to this text field here, like hello world, I can see whether or not my workflow will run effectively by the information that's passed in through this event by clicking on Start Debugging. It's going to, off to the right here, show the information that's going to come in through that start schema, and it's going to show any information that may be tied to this workflow before it runs. You can simply click on play here or continue to run the workflow, and without getting into too much detail, there are other things here that you can use to debug your workflow without having to run through the whole thing. But for this example, I'm just going to click continue, and I can see that everything completed successfully. If anything were to fail, it would show red or yellow errors effectively at one of these steps in the workflow. But since everything passed, I can see that everything turned green, and on my phone here I can see I got my text message saying hello world. That's a quick example showing how to do input and output mapping on a workflow. In the next episode, we're going to show how to deploy a workflow onto your Engagement Designer Administration Console and then effectively map that workflow to trigger on something like a phone call.